I think the number one thing that people say about you is that when you say Islam, you mean all Muslims.
Right, right.
So take it away.
Yeah, so the claim is that I generalize about Muslims, and this is incredibly ironic because half the time in that Bill Maher clip was spent where I was talking about statistics and poll results and percentages, and a certain percentage is jihadist, and then there's a wider circle of Islamists, and then there's a wider circle of conservatives, and so I never generalize about the Muslim world. And insofar as we have good data on the numbers of people who subscribe to various beliefs, that I'm always looking at those data, and so and everything I say about the problem of Islam and Islamism takes as its area of concern first and foremost the people living in the Muslim world who are living under the shadow of, if not the boot of theocracy.
Understanding the limitations of human reasoning, how biased and flawed and often shallow and silly we are, but when we push against each other, we challenge each other and we get better, we get smarter together. On this view of human nature, on this view of intellectual life, a university must have viewpoint diversity, and it dies. It dies if it has political orthodoxy and a monoculture.
Women and gays and freethinkers and public intellectuals and atheists, people who email me saying they're afraid their mother and father will kill them if they knew they were an atheist, for instance. And there's nobody who I celebrate more than Muslim apostates and true reformist Muslims, like my co-author on this new book, Maajid Nawaz, who have taken just heroic risks to say critical things about the faith in a context where it's much more dangerous to do so than the context in where you and I live.
Ex-Muslims, arguably more than any other group, are deeply familiar with the problems entrenched within Muslim communities and inherent within Islamic scriptures. As most of us happen to be both people of color and first or second generation immigrants, we are doubly affected, both by hatred and violence from Muslims, but also bigotry and xenophobia from the broader American public. Despite all this, my experience over the last 2 years has made me wary of speaking up, even to an audience such as this. I always expected feeling unwelcome from Muslim audiences, but I didn't anticipate an equal amount of hostility from my allies on the left. For example, when I first published a piece fact-checking Raza Aslan, who is a prominent Muslim scholar, on his dismissal of female genital mutilation as only an African problem, not a Muslim one, I got many responses from people unhappy with what I wrote, almost all of whom questioned my motives rather than addressing my claims. To my surprise, most of my critics were not Muslims. Rather, they identified as liberals and sometimes even atheists. Some darkly alluded to my agenda, and others claimed that as a former Muslim, there was no way I could be trusted with fair criticism.
And I mean, so if I were a Muslim in Pakistan saying half of what I'm saying on this show, I would have a life expectancy of about 5 hours.
Right.
And that is a political and human rights reality that every liberal who's using this term Islamophobia is disregarding, not at their peril, at the peril of all the people who are not being helped by Westerners who could help, and non-Muslims who could help. And what non-Muslims can do is help in whatever way possible to make criticism of theocracy in the Muslim world safe to do.
There is a curious double standard at play when Muslim clerics and activists that are known to be anti-Semites and homophobes are welcomed on campuses, touring nationally, invited to give lectures by Muslim student associations, while feminists like Asra Nomani, who has been fighting for equality of the sexes, for the right to female entry to the priestly class, is branded as a bigot by the same Muslim student organization. And the authorities at universities like Duke succumb to this brazen attempt to silence her.
When I showed up at Yale in 1981, here's what it said over the doorway. It said Lux et Veritas, so truth as the telos, the purpose, the goal of the university was very clear and explicit. But over the time that I've been in the academic world, the telos at many schools has been gradually changing to more the Marxist one of change. The point of this place is to change the world, and not just change in general, but social justice in particular.
Women should be able to work. Men should be able and feel under some obligation to take an active role in the nurturing of their children and helping in the home and all the rest of it. But we kind of lost a sense of proportion here. We kind of lost a sense that actually there are some irreducible differences between the sexes, and no, it's not sort of stupid and ignorant to say that. It is true. And unless we actually acknowledge what those differences are, we can't actually then shape and fashion households to accommodate reality. Once again, we're trying to refashion reality to accommodate an idea of what we think should be the case, and that way lies a great deal of distress.
The basic rule is this: we don't look out at the world and say, where's the weight of the evidence? We start with an initial supposition and we say, can I believe it? If I want to believe something, I ask, can I believe it? Can I find a justification? But if I don't want to believe it, I start by saying, must I believe it? Am I forced to believe it, or can I escape? So just to give you one example, in a classic study, students come into the lab, they're taking psychology classes, they're learning about experimental methods, so they're given a study, looks like it's from the journal Science, and they're asked to critique the methods. And the study seems to show that caffeine consumption is associated with breast cancer. And your job now is to read the study and say, what do you think of the methods? Well, who do you think finds a lot of flaws in that study? Who do you think? Coffee drinkers. Do you think all coffee drinkers are trying to find flaws in the study? Women who drink coffee are desperately saying, must I believe it? Must I believe it? What could possibly be wrong? And they find all kinds of things wrong with it. The others say, oh gosh, okay, I didn't know that. So this is called motivated reasoning. And there's great research from Dan Kahan at Yale that scholars and experts are just as subject to this problem, and sometimes more so. The more you know about a field, the easier you can find post hoc justifications for whatever you want to believe. So motivated scholarship is the rule throughout the academy. If a scholar undertakes research in order to support a political agenda, she or he is almost guaranteed to succeed, and to believe that she or he is not biased. Motivated scholarship puts things out there. A weak study with a small sample size will get propagated across the academy, across the world. Very difficult to recall if it's disproven, because if people want to believe it, they will.
Maryam Namazi, who is an ex-Muslim activist, was disinvited to speak at Trinity. Ayaan Hirsi Ali at Brandeis. The British Student Union now allies itself broadly with Islamist organizations such as CAGE. To quote Nick Cohen from his article from The Guardian, university managers are no better than their teenage heresy hunters. They say they want to oppose radical Islam in argument. The lawyers' secular society took them at their word. It tried to present an investigation at the University of West London into Islamist groups that were all over campuses, despite their record of advocating Jew hatred, homophobia, and misogyny. The university authorities banned the secularists.
And many students become intellectually fragile from the lack of challenge, and that's why when a controversial speaker comes to campus, they don't just not go, they don't argue back, they have to come together to get the speaker banned, or they do a protest to drown him or her out.
By and large, women have changed the calibration of where their best interests lie. In the past, women thought of themselves as, they may have wanted to work, but they thought of themselves as wanting to have children. And in order to have children, they needed to have the father of their children on board to support them and their children while the children were growing up, and therefore they looked for a marriageable mate, and they married him. Along came a whole bunch of social changes, and as a result, women decided they could do it on their own. They could be, if they wanted, mother and father to their children. They could have the child without a father on board at all. Visit the local sperm bank. They could do without the father completely. If they had a father, if they were married to the father, or if they lived with the father of their child, you know what? Didn't like him, sling him out, because ultimately we can go it alone now. And the result of that was that men kind of got marginalized, they got pushed out, they were made to feel as if they were spare parts in the human race, that they were basically a waste of space, that they were only needed to provide the sperm in the first place, and then I think I called them sperm donors, walking wallets, and occasional au pairs. That was the limit of their usefulness to women. And they became kind of demoralized in every sense, demoralized. If they weren't going to have one woman making herself uniquely available to them, well, why stop? So they started fathering serial children.
We took the top 150 schools from the U.S. News rankings, and great. You want to know, you want a school that has a small faculty to student ratio. Well, U.S. News will factor that in. But what if you actually want to be exposed to viewpoint diversity? What if you want your child to not just be in an indoctrination mill? How can you find out where to go? You can't.
Let me be clear. I don't think anyone, even bigots emerging from Muslim communities or anywhere else, should be silenced. What I ask is that we stand up for the right to speak of all, including both those who stand with us and those who call for the death of our fellow disbelievers. Our society functions because we believe that hurt feelings mean essentially nothing in the eyes of our justice systems. But of course, it is claimed that this is a special case, because these aren't just personal hurt feelings, these are religious hurt feelings, and not just any religion, but the religion of the underdog, of the brown man. It's not uncommon to hear from commentators in various media outlets that the victims of Charlie Hebdo had somehow provoked others with their offensive cartoons into taking their lives. The sentiment seemed to be that the cartoonists must to some degree be held accountable for their own murders, even as dozens of cartoonists from the East drew panels in support of their counterparts in the West, risking their own lives for freedom of speech.